Welcome to another episode of Bitcash Breakthrough, your gateway to digital wealth. In this series, we talk about crypto education, stories, inspiration, and actionable advice from industry experts. Please welcome Brandon Lovejoy, a masterful storyteller and strategic thinker whose diverse experience spans film, video production, audio engineering, design, mixed media, and photography. From the banks of the Mississippi River in southern Minnesota, Brandon draws on his global travels and varied professional life, from maritime pursuits to blockchain technology. A passionate advocate for regenerative economics and traditional wellness practices, he now serves as the head of community relations at EOS Network Foundation. There, he crafts narratives and bridge token holders and network custodians, enhancing engagement and articulating EOS's vision to the world. Welcome, Brandon. Really appreciate having you.
Thank you.
I know we met years ago, I believe in the BitShares community. So it's been a long time. So I always like to start from the beginning. What got you into crypto?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I guess it was just a friend of mine who was really insistent that I buy Bitcoin a long time ago. And I was poor at the time. I had just moved back from California. I had failed business and I was just licking my wounds. And he was like, buy Bitcoin. This is, I don't know. I can't remember the years very clearly. I think it was 2012 or something. Anyway, Bitcoin was $60 and I could afford, finally, after a lot of cajoling, I bought 2 Bitcoin for $120. And I was like, this better be worth it. And then like a week later, it went up to $1,200. And I was like, so I sold both my Bitcoin and I went traveling. I took that like windfall profit of $2,400 and I was just like, I'm out. And then
You could have probably bought a yacht with that too.
I know, let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about that.
Yeah.
And then no, there's been a whole string of missed opportunities, obviously, like a lot of us have experienced. But no, I did. I left traveling and I went to South America and then. But while I was traveling, I started thinking about blockchain more because I knew just enough to be really curious about it. And I just started thinking about like more of the socio-political dimensions of blockchain and how was destined to have an impact on society in the way that we relate and communicate and all that stuff, and how it could provide like a layer of integrity. And that's what really brought me back. And that's how I got involved in the early days of BitShares. You're wearing the OG BitShares t-shirt that I actually probably put in the mail at one point in time. So yeah, we got involved in BitShares and then just one thing led to another. It's a long sordid tale filled with mystery and intrigue. But then here we are on EOS all these years later.
Yeah, before we get there, I'm curious too then, because Bitcoin, you were fortunate enough to be in it early and then you had a windfall and then you started to think more about the bigger picture. What was it that drew you to BitShares in particular back then? This was probably 2014, 2015.
It was interesting. I don't even know how I was just poking around the internet looking for different projects doing sort of novel blockchain applications. And for listeners, you have to bring yourself back in time or imagine yourself back in time to when, I think at this point, Ethereum had launched. It was very early. It had just launched. And so there was like Bitcoin and there was like one general purpose smart contract platform, Ethereum. But I think it was even pre-Ethereum. My timelines are always a little fuzzy on Ethereum, but anyway, I just somehow found my way to what was then called Invictus Innovations. It was like Dan Larimer's early like entity before things turned into BitShares, ProtoShares, and then BitShares. And I think it was the way they were thinking about it and talking about it that really intrigued me because they seemed to be more in line with the values I think that have spun out of the blockchain space a little bit or been embraced by the blockchain space due to what the technology enables fundamentally, that disintermediation and stuff. I liked a lot of the language on the website and then my friend that urged me to get into Bitcoin also for some reason was into BitShares and so it just lined up and then I got involved in the BitShares Talk forum, which for somebody like me who's just really intellectually stimulated by like lots of different philosophical conversations and game theory and all this stuff. That point in time in history, I think you'll recall, you can back me up here. The BitShares Talk Forum was like a symposium of all these pretty incredible thinkers. Areg, our current engineer with the ENF, was there, and many people were there. many years ago discussing all these really interesting, the intersection of like economics and political theory and game theory and so many different things all coming together. And it was fascinating. I felt like I got like a huge education just from reading and engaging in those forums, and it was mind opening. So that's how I stayed in that strain of blockchain, I guess, for so long.
Yeah. No, and I spoke with Rodrigo just yesterday, and he just mentioned how you guys did the tour, and that must have been great. And he mentioned you were like, he still drinks tea because of you every day, and so yeah, and then I guess it's probably when you think about it, the origins of the MakerDAO guys were there, and they were building up BitShares before they transitioned over to Ethereum. So that's another, yeah, just people aren't aware about the history there, but it's always good to know. Any takeaways from the BitShares days? Anything you learned from the platform itself, or after many years? I'm sure it's still, as Rodrigo says, still active, but it doesn't have nearly the attention compared to many other ecosystems these days. So any thoughts in general? It's early
I mean,
days. So
BitShares was just so weirdly ahead of its time, I think. I don't think anyone can even really dispute it if they go back and just look at what BitShares was when it was that, because it was a decentralized exchange before anyone even knew. Very few people in the industry were like, we need a decentralized exchange to protect ourselves from all these shenanigans. And most people were like, what problem are you trying to solve? I don't understand. And then they kept getting wrecked repeatedly on these centralized exchanges over and over again that would, for one reason or another, like fold or disappear or get rugged or something. And I feel like that lesson had to be learned really long time before you started to see proliferation of these other decentralized exchanges. But BitShares is unique in that it was a decentralized exchange blockchain, essentially, with its own like system for stable coins, collateralized, USD, BitUSD, and stuff like that. So it was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. But then obviously other people came along and did things with an extra level of, I don't know, time marched on, and new iterations and evolutions of dexes came to be, and BitShares stayed where it was, and it didn't really continue to evolve. Props to the people that are still working on BitShares. You guys are awesome. But I think we've seen this with multiple blockchain projects that kind of get stuck in time, in essence. Like you could even say Steam, which came later, right? Steam blockchain, conceived as like a social media blockchain, was like not a general purpose blockchain originally. It was like a single purpose blockchain. The reward pool, the tokens went to pay for the network validators, and they also went to pay for people contributing to writing on the chain and stuff like that. That went through a whole crazy saga with Justin Sun orchestrating kind of a hostile takeover of the network, which then forked and became Hive and Steam. And I think actually maybe I'm making a point against what I was previously saying, but because Hive is still really interesting and relevant in that I don't think any other blockchain has really succeeded in doing what Hive set out to do, and it's not growing by leaps and bounds, but it occupies a really interesting niche, like really interesting use case in the industry for publishing, and it still falls prey to some of the problems that hadn't been solved at that time and maybe still haven't been solved in terms of the ways that it can be gamed and controlled, but really interesting. I guess I viewed EOS, just to keep going with the timeline here, as like the answer to some of the shortcomings of both BitShares and Steam, by being like a general purpose smart contract platform that could, like, you can run an entire instance of, like, Steam could be like a smart contract on EOS, and EOS obviously is now can accommodate multiple dexes, so it is capable of doing all those things and doing them well. And the flexible permission structure in EOS allows you to just get a lot of mileage out of the core infrastructure.
yeah, let's go talk about EOS then. Let's go ahead and just say maybe what was your kind of, yeah, what were your beginnings in EOS? You followed Dan Larimer, I assume, from BitShares to Steam to EOS, so that's part of it. Was there anything in particular that made you excited compared to Steam or BitShares about EOS? And also, maybe since a lot of people don't know the history, maybe you could give a kind of a short version of the history of EOS. I know you could go on for days just talking about like the story of EOS, but just maybe like the very short version of it, just high level, but catch people up to today, right? Because it's been many years since in 2017, 18.
Yeah, Block One was the original founding team that published the software that was then called EOSIO. They did a year-long token sale, ERC20 token, which was later redeemable for EOS. The community I think this is the crucial part I'd like to get in everyone's brain, is the community of just a decentralized group of node operators from all around the world that were inspired by what this could mean, what this could be, what this network could be, launched the network. And they honored that original token distribution snapshot from B1. And that defined the original Genesis distribution of EOS tokens based on that year-long crowd sale. But I think the distinction is key, that the community launched actually the network based on this reference implementation of EOS.io that was published at the time. I think it was like Dawn 2.0. Yeah, and then the middle part is where there's a lot of controversy and people have different opinions. I guess suffice to say, I'll editorialize a little bit here and just be like, the community felt over time that Block One kind of failed to live up to a lot of its promises. So the original founding group didn't necessarily bring a lot of that war chest, that $4.1 billion to bear to benefit the network. I was part of an early block producer team, EOS Detroit, as we alluded to before. I watched the network just get starved out slowly through lack of investment and lack of funds for many years. And eventually the network had enough of that treatment and behavior and just not getting what it needed. We had no really functional SDKs. We had a lot of things we're still missing if you wanted to create a community that could really leverage this software and not just use it for specialized like corporate purposes or whatever. And so, yeah, the community basically fired Block One. The BPs stopped the vesting schedule from system contract to B1 and forked the code base to a community created version called Antelope. So EOS.io rebranded to Antelope. And many of the engineers from B1 came over to the EOS Network Foundation, which was created at that time, to make good on the vision that they had set out to achieve in developing this general purpose blockchain, smart contract blockchain platform to begin with. So we ended up with like most of the talent, apart from Dan, who went off and did his own thing. And that's like the short version of the story. So since then, the ENF has basically instituted a bunch of programs to bring EOS back off of life support. Engineers, like I already said, fixed thousands of open issues on GitHub and forked the 2.0 or 2.1 version of EOS.io to Antelope, which was then Antelope 3.1. And since then, we've released multiple versions of the Antelope Leap, which is the C implementation of the software, to where we're at now, which is Leap 5, bringing just a ton of improvements, and then funded the creation of SDKs through WharfKit. There was a series of blue papers that came out that suggested all sorts of ways to address some of the deficiencies that EOS was facing at the time. And so we funded a lot of work there. And I don't know, this is where I could go on for an hour. It's like all the stuff that's been accomplished now. But I would say the cool thing about where EOS is at now is we have this insanely performant, really stable, ultra reliable blockchain infrastructure. Layer one will soon have 1 to 3 second finality, possibly sub-second finality with the next coming hard fork. And we have a stack for the first time. We have like a complete stack, because early on we didn't have WharfKit. We didn't have this developer tooling. So everyone that wanted to build on EOS, for instance, Upland, which is one of the largest metaverse apps in the world and a big, like lots of transactions on, I think, compared to any other game or metaverse game built on a blockchain. I don't know where they stand currently, but they had to hand roll all their own code. Basically, they had to create all their own tools to interact with the blockchain painstakingly, because that toolkit didn't exist. But now, because of WharfKit, that's not a problem anymore. And we're starting to see like the development of this whole stack of different technologies to basically build highly performant web apps, decentralized applications on EOS. So that's a relatively modern development that we've got the whole complete picture, all the pieces of the puzzle are together. And
That's
now,
fantastic.
of course, yeah, there's like even more I could keep going. Like right now we're like looking at a whole new tokenomics proposal and all sorts of stuff, but maybe stop me before I get ahead of myself.
Yeah. So I think that's great. So we got a history to catch people up. It was a transition from Block One that did an ICO that kind of failed to live up to expectations. And I think there was a transition over to a foundation, the F, and just to be able to sustain especially the technology, which is being somewhat neglected. And now you're at a point where there's developer tools and just updates to the technology using the framework called Antelope. There was a coalition of other kind of organizational participants. But so let's talk about that though. Technology has always been an incredible part of what made EOS. Even the original Block One, Dan Larimer is a fantastic architect, had a very good core, but it needed updates. But currently, how do you see EOS stand compared to the other, let's say, layer one technologies? Maybe compare and contrast with the common change, just so that people are aware. Okay, hey, how good is this technology? What's your view on that? Like, how does it compare? What does it do good? Maybe what are some of the challenges or pros and cons about EOS compared to other layer one chains?
One of the really interesting things I think about EOS that sets it apart from a lot of other layer ones. Now, I'm not a developer, and I haven't done like a lot of comparative blockchain analysis in terms of comparing all the layer ones to EOS. We've been on our own evolutionary path for a long time, and I think there's a lot of merit to the way that EOS is designed. And so I can't really do justice, I don't think, to a full comparison of other layer ones, but I can speak to the merits of EOS, and I think there are some standout qualities. If you allow me to cheat a little bit, like I'm just going to read something. Because I was trying to understand like the permission structure on EOS as like how it is differentiates from other layer ones. So EOS allows anyone to do multi-sig transactions without needing contracts or third parties. You can set delay requirements for actions. You can have multiple keys that control different types of actions to allow for extra security. You can have a threshold of people on certain actions to allow for extra security. This is all innate to EOS's permission structures. You don't need to create a smart contract to manage multi-sigs, which is really cool. You can have accounts that control other accounts, so you can set up organizational structures. This is just native functionality in EOS. I think that's really cool. I haven't seen that anywhere else. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist other places, but probably not in this way. So that's one thing. Apart from that flexibility and permission structure, which I think is really huge, EOS is just insanely reliable. We've had no downtime for 2000 some days now since shortly after Genesis. There was one like little tweak they made like right after Genesis, and then since then it's been running without a hitch ever since. So in terms of just longevity and reliability, this is platinum. We're doing good. That's one of our superpowers.
What about performance? That's common, realistic performance too, because everyone throws out numbers. EOS has always been in the conversation in terms of transactions per second, but then people will always, just for example, Solana, right? It's supposed to have a lot of transactions per second, but when the meme coin craze came, it's like 30% failed transactions, right? So it's okay, how reliable is this number?
I want to say some insane number though. I believe that. So there was a time when EOS was, some people viewed it as spam, other people just viewed it as inevitable consequence of the way that we had resources set up. But there was the IDOS thing, which is people like doing proof of work mining using essentially free resources at the time. Or like you could stake and have resources, so why not use them? And there was all this mining happening. And I think during that peak of that, we did something like 100 million transactions in a 24-hour period, some crazy number like that. And it never really buckled under the pressure of any of that. It was intense. We certainly processed like a huge load, but it was also a really good test of what the network can handle. In terms of transactions per second, I don't know what's the official number right now. I know upwards beyond 10,000 transactions per second is like very safe to say, but we're probably cruising much higher than that in terms of TPS, like probably pushing up, I want to say 70 or something like that, 1,000. But realistically, a better metric for any blockchain is probably swaps per second. TPS is like one of those things you can set up a testnet and you can run your transactions really fast in a controlled environment and then say you've claimed some like massive number of transactions per second. But on a live network, how many swaps, how many like return voyages, how many complex operations can the blockchain handle per second? I can't really speak to the operations per second or swaps per second on EOS currently. I just don't have those numbers in my brain. That'd be a good question for Zach. Zach, I'd like to phone a friend if I could. Zach Gall, he's our chief communications officer. Suffice to say, EOS is super performant. We don't have a problem of enough capacity or not enough. We can handle whatever anyone throws at us right now, pretty much. I think recently we had a couple of incidents where there were some inscriptions on the network, and you saw, and this was on the EOS EVM, and you saw, so we have an EVM that's a separate layer, like virtual EOS EVM. So EOS is a VM in a sense, and then the EVM is the Ethereum virtual machine running like on on EOS. And there was a wave of inscriptions that hit like all these other EVM chains, and we saw them falling, like down, freezing up and running into trouble. And the EOS EVM just more or less just sailed through it. We didn't have any downtime. There were some issues with RPC nodes, but that was like just like between the blockchain and the user, not really like the blockchain itself wasn't affected. So I don't know. I'm not the best numbers guy. If you want to talk performance, you should get one of our engineers on. Like you say, every blockchain claims some insane performance qualities. I think what EOS just has is flexibility and like massive amounts of capacity. We could be like, for instance, there's another entity, ESCC, like EOS Coin Chain. They've launched a separate. So we have two EVMs. I think we might be the only layer one blockchain running two separate EVMs. Interesting. And they've launched a whole other EVM on EOS specifically to do stable coins, and this is for the Japanese market, I think, predominantly, with the Japanese yen being the stable coin of choice there. So that's interesting. We could host multiple EVMs. We could have all sorts of other virtualization happening on chain. And then RAM is really interesting too. EOS uses RAM. So we have 390 gigs of RAM capacity on the network currently. And EOS stores everything in RAM. There's a little bit written to disk, but not that really matters for anyone, for the sake of discussion here. That's why EOS is able to serve up data so quickly. And so RAM is an interesting concept. You can think of it as like DPIN, like a decentralized physical infrastructure network, or a real world asset. Users can buy RAM, a system resource, and own it like you'd own land. And in the future, there may be ability to lease RAM and stuff like that. Currently, we've added some new functionality to RAM, so it's transferable between EOS accounts, and then we've wrapped it with a system token wrapper. So now it's tradable off of EOS, but you can't create more of it. There's just the network could decide to add more, but currently the consensus is to stop issuing more, and that's what was done this past December. And you saw a lot of renewed interest in that layer. So it's decentralized state, which is ownable, which is cool. We have that resource layer. Whereas compute, like net and CPU, the resources you can purchase with EOS in order to push a transaction through for like fractions of a penny, that kind of renews every 24 hours. You rent it now. There's a rental market. It's called power up. But RAM is just finite. There's only so much RAM out there. If somebody owns it, they own it. If they occupy it, then the network is basically storing that data and able to dish it up at a moment's notice. And then they can release that data and release that RAM and get their EOS back if they want, that they used to purchase the RAM to begin with. So it's a really interesting layer. I don't know if any other blockchain approaches memory in quite the same way, but again, like the blockchain space is so huge, it's hard to keep track of what everyone's doing.
That's fantastic. So we have a few minutes left. So let's just talk about what's happening today. What's the summary overall of the latest activities? I know there's a big proposal for tokenomics, but also there's a Bitcoin layer 2 system, but just maybe highlight all the things, and we'll have you back to explain more in detail of all the things that are going on. But maybe just touch at a high level everything that's going on with the ENF and EOS today.
Yeah, and maybe you can link to the PDF for the tokenomics proposal in your video, because it's a lot to go over. But essentially, EOS technically has a 10 billion EOS cap. And currently EOS has a 3% rate of inflation annually, but it's compounding because next year there's going to be more EOS, and 3% of more EOS is more than that. So it's a pretty good curve at 3% over time. The network launched at 5. I won't go into all the history, but it got dropped lower than it is now and then raised back up to 3% when the ENF came to be. So we've got this network inflation flowing to multiple entities now. We've got the ENF, EOS Network Foundation, and EOS Labs, which is more like the business development incubation arm of EOS. And under this new proposal, and then the block producers, of course, they receive pay from the network through network inflation to keep securing the network. So under the new tokenomics, basically, we would burn essentially 80% of the future supply of EOS. So I'm talking future supply. So that 10 billion cap would drop down to 2.1 billion. And that would be a hard fixed cap. And then instead of just this token emission coming out of the current supply, it would be pools of tokens allocated for specific things. So there's several buckets. I should have this in front of me to list them all out. But essentially, there's several buckets. One is for staking rewards. One is for RAM market making. One is for the block producers to pay. One is for ENF. One is for labs. One is for middleware. I might be missing one, but I think that's most of it. So it's a mint of all these tokens, and then they get locked up in vesting schedules and they follow a halving. All but 2 buckets are not liquid at the beginning of this, should this proposal go through. So you end up with tokens incentivizing people that want to stake EOS on EOS through staking rewards. And that's a rate that would be set by the block producers, but they have a pool of funds to work with and a release schedule that would be determined by this proposal. And it's basically a halving. So for instance, the ENF, our funds, we would basically begin with about 10% more than what we're getting now. But after 4 years, that would be cut in half. The EOS Network Foundation would suddenly, in 4 years from now, on the 5th year, would receive like half as much as it does. Same with block producers, same with every other bucket, but RAM market making and the middleware are the only 2 that are liquid and not subject to this halving. So basically, EOS would move to a fixed supply, and most of it would just, in terms of token emissions from these buckets, would just get cut in half every 4 years like Bitcoin does. So that kind of incentivizes. And then one other key feature is that the network fees would go to the block producers. So they're the only bucket that gets offset. So that kind of incentivizes block producers to encourage more network activity or fund things that encourage more network activity. And so that's like the tokenomics proposal in a nutshell. Hopefully I didn't leave anything really crucial out. And then, there's the certain portion of EOS, 35 million, is set aside to purchase RAM. That's crucial. The network needs RAM for many things. So like the EVM consumes RAM, and business development that Labs is doing, other projects need RAM. That network RAM would be purchased for future purposes like that. And then as far as XSAT, that's a sprawling topic. I'll try to keep it really brief. Essentially, because of RAM being such an interesting decentralized state function, the idea is to create a docking layer actually between Bitcoin and layer 2s and have EOS RAM serve that function of holding all the state data of Bitcoin. And there's a role for Bitcoin validators to validate that state, and then a way for layer 2s to basically utilize that, but at the speed of EOS. So XSAT is positioning itself as like a between Bitcoin and layer 2s, essentially. For further details on that, you're going to want to dive into the forthcoming white paper and any other. I think there's like a little mini white paper out right now. There's certainly more information forthcoming. There's a few conferences coming up where XSAT will be presented on. We can link to those details too if you, and what else? Yeah, just the other thing is just development is finally kicking off. Graymass, one of the biggest teams kind of building on EOS right now. They built the Anchor wallet and WharfKit, they built the whole SDK suite. They've also got a really cool system called Droplets, which I would totally encourage people to check out, especially if you get into RAM. It's like an inscription tool native on EOS now, essentially, but it's burnable. Or you can free up the RAM. So basically, if you buy EOS RAM, you can use it to mint droplets, and each droplet occupies like a chunk of RAM. And then you can use those droplets to basically opt into different distributions. So other token distributions, like fair token distributions on the network. And so far, like Graymass is eating their own dog food and doing one called Scrap, which would be for a game that they're launching called Shipload, which is like a space trading game. It looks pretty cool. But the droplet system is really interesting because it's like a new airdrop method where people opt in through purchasing RAM and locking it up as droplets, which they can reclaim later. They can burn the droplets and get their RAM back and sell it if they want to, or whatever they want to do. You're not like stuck. So that's cool. Like unlike inscriptions where you're just stuck in that inscription, you can free it up. So it just allows you to opt in to token distributions from anyone else that comes along. Yeah, I don't know. And then just like developer in general, like I said, we have a full stack now. Like the tooling's all there. So it's like day zero in a lot of ways for EOS. All the pieces of the puzzle are here now. And this tokenomics proposal, if it goes through, will definitely, in my view, lead to a pretty huge watershed moment and renaissance on EOS with increased development and market making and all the good stuff.
Yeah, a
Stay
lot of the
tuned.
infrastructure seems to be there. You're talking about kind of liquidity and market making, and also just the developer tools as well. Is there, and then also attracting, I guess, layer two, Bitcoin layer two. So what is the kind of the vision overall of like gaming was, I think, an area that you guys were going to go after, but at a high level, are you guys still in the process of identifying kind of the strategy of which markets you're going to reach out to try to recruit startups and organizations, enterprises, whatever it is?
Like, I can't really speak to a lot of the business development stuff. It's happening
Mhm.
through labs. I don't really work for labs. I'm familiar with what they're up to, but they, let's see here, through the ENV, so we didn't touch on ENV, there's like also another entity within the EOS ecosystem called EOS Network Ventures. They were established through a fund that now can invest in ecosystem projects and have that any equity that's generated or any profit that's generated through those investments return back to the network, either to buy back and burn EOS or to reinvest in more projects to build on EOS. Yeah, the ENV already committed a pretty substantial sum of money to EV and GameFi. So there's definitely like a clear GameFi move. But I would say XSAT is like the interesting thing to watch in terms of EOS positioning itself as this docking layer between Bitcoin and other L2s, because that's, I think the implications of that are pretty profound. But really, like EOS is just, yeah, if anything, EOS has suffered from a lack of clear definition in terms of it has never picked a niche like to specifically focus on. And part of that's just because it's a general purpose smart contract platform and you can do whatever you dream of doing with such a thing. So we've yet to see, I think, all the use cases that are possible. But like for games like Aaron Cox of Greymass is building and his team, it's really cool to see super performant dApps that are able to like abstract away. I mean, maybe that's one of the other like really cool things that I think is possible in EOS that we're just starting to see now is really hiding the blockchain behind just clean usability. Those because of the permission structure I referenced earlier, like that's increasingly possible now that the tooling is there to make it so users don't have to deal with all the funky business of blockchain unless they want to. So that's an interesting territory that I think we can explore increasingly. And I think with games and other things, you're going to see more, or in any other big application using blockchain, you're going to see a premium on usability, less so on the back end being the featured. We don't say I'm going to use the internet today. It's just there. The internet is like a feature of reality that we all like use as a medium for information. I think we're going to start to look at blockchain a bit more like that in the future, where you can still leverage some of the capabilities of blockchain if you really want to get into it, or if the services you're using expose that level of the blockchain to you. But also it's going to, in other areas, I think, recede into the background as a data layer, like a really secure, high integrity, immutable data layer that can protect people's data for whatever the application may be. So
Sounds
yeah.
great. Yeah, I agree with that as well. Yeah, it's just it's less about the technology and more about the use cases and the usability. But yeah, let's wrap up there. But through your journey through crypto from the very beginning, getting mining or getting a couple Bitcoin, selling it all the way till now, working with the ENF. What are some takeaways that you'd share with either token purchasers or startup founders or anything in the industry? Just are there maybe few learnings or experiences that are lessons you'd like to share with an audience?
First, don't send your tokens to random people that are asking you to do that and promising great rewards. That's never true. Don't do that. Somebody messages you on Telegram, no, don't do that. Second, I would say like my biggest realization through all of this is markets in general, but specifically in crypto, are entirely not rational. So we've had a joke in EOS for a long time that we're in it for the tech, because in many ways the price has not followed the market over these past many years. And a lot of that was just like, I think we're so focused on the tech that a lot of and of course, like some of the altercations we've had with the whole difficulty growing up, I think, and coming of age as a blockchain has prevented us from becoming more of a culture unto ourselves in many ways. So it's interesting to see how some of these meme coin projects have like really galvanized huge communities like around essentially no value proposition other than fun. But fun is a value proposition if you think about it. And it's been super underappreciated, I think, by a lot of people in the industry. We know we have tech that can perform actual serious uh, like back-end functionality. But yeah, don't discount fun, because it's a real serious player in this world of value that you're in, if you're in crypto. And but I would say my call to people is to, like, let's focus as much as possible on utility and value, and see what some of these, I think we're getting to a level of maturity of blockchain technology more broadly, where we can start to build really usable software on top of it that leverages blockchain as the back end. And I feel like we're waiting for the Linux desktop, but it's like the blockchain version of that. So this is going to be the year of the Linux desktop. I just know it. Blockchain is, for me, like I said, I've made a lot of moves in my crypto career that were not financially smart, because I didn't like ape into a lot of these things, because I don't see the value in that. It's just a clone of this other thing that already did the same thing. But that has not necessarily served me financially, like to be like so much of a purist. So I'd say don't be such a purist. But also, let's promote utility, and let's promote actual use cases of actual applications, because it's possible now. Maybe it wasn't possible 5-6 years ago, or even 3 years ago, or even 2 years ago. It wasn't really possible at scale, I don't think, because there's so many different teams trying to solve this conundrum of how to do blockchain in a way that doesn't sacrifice too much of anything. But yeah, and also blockchain is expensive. It just is. If you want like cheap data, like use a traditional database. Blockchain is for what you need the properties of blockchain for: immutability, data censorship resistance, like timestamping, all those like smart contract logic, all that stuff that you can do with blockchain. Like, that's really great, but we can't just do blockchain for blockchain's sake. We need to identify what are the use cases of blockchain that are where it really shines, and build around that. I think we need to see like a whole new generation of applications leveraging some of these possibilities. And I could proselytize for forever, but you're trying to
That's
wrap. So
Sounds good. Yeah, really appreciate it, Brandon. Yeah, a lot of good advice. Look for the utility and value. I second that. And just don't try to use blockchain for everything. That was your last comment. And
yeah,
and markets are irrational. That's the reality. Regardless of what we strive for, markets are irrational. So really appreciate it, Brandon. We'll have you back giving updates on what's happening with EOS, and just what's happening with you as well. So really appreciate you sharing all your advice and your story. So yeah, and thanks. It's a wrap, and I'll see you next time.
all right. Thanks, June. Thanks for having me.